And everybody in the hunting party has to be on point in such an attack. You need to rely on every single of your hunting mates. If there's only one who just said who's just running chicken, it may be all over for the others. So this is a question of life and death. So it makes sense to somehow initiate hunters and select them in such a strange and spooky ritual, because this is when it's creating what in psychology is termed light bulb memories, flash bulb. So really it's memories which are sticking, and you are experiencing this with all these other hunters around there, with your group. So it puts you together, and this is some kind somehow creating the group is creating the cohesion in your group if you go through this experience.
Jens Notroff is a prehistoric archaeologist and science communicator who used to work on the famous Gobekli Tepe excavation site, the so-called oldest known monumental, and as we'll discuss, possibly also religious structure in the world. This is going to be some pretty crazy, exciting stuff. Jens, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The question is this: how is it possible that this impressive complex of monuments built around 12,000 years ago, so thousands of years before the first cities ever appear on the map, was put there by hunter-gatherers, if that was indeed the case? And most of all, why? And we're going to get there, but before we do, I'd like you to tell me when and how was the site first discovered? And when it was, did archaeologists immediately recognize its incredible significance?
I think it's a good idea to start with the history of discovery, actually. The site of Göbekli Tepe is known, at least as a Neolithic, that means Young Stone Age site, since the 1960s. So there was a joint survey by the universities of Chicago and Istanbul, and they were just traveling the country and noting down sites of interest, sites which apparently are of historic interest, of archaeological interest. And the Gobekli Tepe was among this list of sites because a lot of flint tools, scattered flint particles were lying around all over the place. So it was pretty clear, okay, this is a site of Stone Age activity, because the typical tools and the material clearly hint at an occupation, or at least some kind of utilization in that time. So that was quite clear in the 1960s. But what was not clear, or did not become clear when, was the monumentality the site was actually hiding, the architecture, because this was all below ground. There was a mount on this rock plateau. Göbekli Tepe is situated in the mountains in southeastern Turkey, near the modern town of Şanlıurfa. So it's a place high up, not really in the valley, not really in today's settlement areas, where are villages around it, of course, but it's a kind of an erratic place. So it's in the mountains, so it was not really on everybody's mind that this is a typical Stone Age settlement position. So the list was published and then largely, well, not forgotten, but there were other sites on that list where we researched them. Chayuni Tepesi, one of the most famous sites of this list, was excavated soon after. And we just make a leap of a couple of years, decades actually. And in 1994, Klaus Schmidt from the German Archaeological Institute, where I'm working now as well as a science communicator and researcher, was traveling the area with this list in hand, looking for other places to excavate. He has just finished work at another site, Nivalichori, not that far away, which today is basically on the bottom of the Atatürk Dam Reservoir Lake. So it was excavated in preparation of this water reservoir. And the important thing about Nivalichori is that this is the site for the first time these T-shaped pillars were discovered. Not of the monumental type, but the smaller type, but they were pretty clear. They had arms and they had the same shape. So it was the first time these T-shaped pillars were discovered and recognized. And this knowledge helped Klaus Schmidt to finally recognize the importance of Göbekli Tepe. So we cannot really blame the colleagues in the 1960s that they did not recognize the monumental architecture which was hidden below ground, because they had no really a picture in mind, an analogy to look for. But Klaus, just coming from Nivolichori and being familiar with this specific type of architecture, soon noticed that some of the rocks sticking out of the field, they're actually parts of such T-shaped pillars. So he immediately saw, okay, this seems to be a related site to what I was already researching. And he put it in one of his journal articles, if I remember correctly. He put it like he immediately realized that he could either turn around and look for another place or spend the rest of his life researching this place. And this, in the end, is what happened. So this is, in very short, the history of discovery. Of course, the locals, the local villagers who were farming the site, Göbekli Tepe, the mound, is the only fertile soil all around this rock plateau. So it was used as farm area. They stumbled upon finds much earlier, and they later told us that a lot of sculpture heads and other stone pieces were occasionally coming up when ploughing the fields. So they were aware of this site already much earlier, but the monumentality was archaeologically recognized only in 1994 when Klaus Schmidt traveled there, and he started excavations a year later in 1995 together.
Why is it always Germans that find everything? You have some uncanny ability
I'm not
to know
sure
what to go for.
Germans, maybe we are the ones talking too much about it in podcasts or something like that. No, it's meanwhile, I think archaeology is a pretty international science and discipline, and modern archaeology is an interdisciplinary international venture.
Of course,
anyway.
it was. I'm sorry.
No. It's I mean,
joke.
it's flattering. So
I was just reading about the guy who discovered Troy or whatever. I think he was German as well, right?
yeah, Schliemann, yeah.
Schliemann, yeah. A lot of debate on that guy. But that's not the topic of the podcast.
Not today.
Today, maybe another time. By the way, before we come back to Göbekli Tepe, I wanted to ask you this. You're an archaeologist that specializes in prehistory. That means that you might find somebody's leather tissue or something that they blew their nose in 20,000 years ago and not much else. And then you have to interpret or construct an entire narrative out of his or her life, and also you have to reconstruct an entire way of life or a culture even from one or a couple of objects. Isn't that a bit frustrating?
No, actually, I mean, archaeology is in general the science which is dealing with the material culture, right? We're looking at the material stuff people left to us. What we're simply put, what we're doing is we're rummaging through the rubbish of other people to spy on their lives. So it sounds a bit creepy, but that's pretty much what we're doing. That's why this rubbish is so important, because it really is much more a mirror of a daily life than, for example, a burial would be. I mean, we're looking into burials as well. It's an important source, but a burial always is a selection, right? It's an orchestration. A burial is meant to provide a certain message about the person buried there, or towards the society, the bereaved. But the rubbish is what you just use, and it's what's left of your daily life. And this really helps us reconstructing how people lived, how people what people were dealing with, what they were eating, how they were building. So that's really that's what's really offering a glimpse into daily life. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just, like every 40-year-old man on the planet, recently I've just been diving headfirst into this obsession with the history of Rome. So I've been watching a lot of like Mary Beard content, the famous English classicist. Now, she has a lot of written sources from the period at her disposal, but I always marvel at how careful she is not to take them at their face value, because, as she says, often the people who are writing might have had a particular agenda. They might have been lying. Maybe the purpose was to influence or convince the reader. So it's tricky. However, you guys don't even have that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain periods archaeologists are doing excavations as well where we have written sources in contrast. So if Roman history is also accompanied by archaeology and Roman science, right? Pompeii,
Of
for
course.
example, is excavated and it is giving us also a glimpse into daily life. And that's quite interesting to compare what the archaeological material sources are telling us and what the written sources are telling us. And it's always interesting to see, okay, where do they confirm each other and where do they contradict each other? Because that's the important point you just mentioned. Written sources always are biased, right? You're writing something about something else or about an event with a clear picture in mind, with a clear message in mind you want to provide. So it's manipulation in good and bad ways. So it's very subjective. But your rubbish is, although it's very individual, it's not really that subjective because it offers a much, much broader glimpse into what you're doing. And that's where material culture is such an important source, I think, of telling about past lives. And that's the main difference. I mean, in prehistoric archaeology simply means we're dealing with cultures which did not develop any writing. So we do not have these written sources to contrast our finds and features, and that makes it more difficult on one hand to come up with interpretations, but it offers also, I would say, much more freedom in because you're not starting your interpretation with a certain picture in mind already, from the written sources.
Okay, but what can constitute trash from prehistory? Like, I imagine, people didn't like build IKEA furniture and then throw it away.
Wow.
And how do you know something is trash and it's not just like random objects?
Oh, that's pretty clear, because everything humans are using or humans are shaping clearly shows the human influence. Even stone tools, you can read stone tools. They've got the memory because you can. Well, if it's real tools, you can follow certain shapes. But even the rubbish, the debitage, the stuff which remains from producing stone tools, shows that it is indeed artificial. Because take for example flintstones, the force you need to create tools to smash with other stones on a flintstone leaves clear marks which are distinguishable from, for example, accidental breaking flintstones. So you can, with a trained eye, you can make this out. And also, I mean, everything people are using at one point may become useless and is either thrown away intentionally in huge rubbish pits, for example, or you lose your stuff. And then there was
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
there was some great news. I'm not sure about the dating anymore, but I think it was a bunch of Paleolithic tools, stone tools, blades in particular, and they were just found in a context which suggested that they probably were put together in kind of a leather case or something like that, and they were a pretty good tool set used by a Paleolithic hunter. So it was not thrown away. It was a distinguished set of tools you would use in your everyday stuff. And next to it, in the same bag or whatever it was, there were broken pieces of other tools. So it was so relatable. Just like, oh no, that's not that bad. I still can use it. So I put it back in my bag. And at some point he seems to have lost this bag because we found it now with all these tools. So yeah, there are so many different ways how material culture ends up in the ground. But rubbish is probably one of the most common one, because I mean we know it from ourselves, right? But we don't need anymore what's broken beyond repair, and we just throw away or leave behind.
Yeah, I asked that because I'm originally from Slovenia, and we have this apparently the oldest flute in the world that was discovered in some cave 40,000 years ago or something. And but people still don't actually know if it was a flute or was it just a piece of bone that a bear bit into and made like two really kind of distinctive shaped
I'm
holes that
familiar with this discussion. I mean, in this case, it's really difficult because the holes, they look so suggestive, but it
exactly
might be some kind of animal traces. But there are other examples there where these flutes are really recognizable, and I mean, in most of the cases, you can see if it's a piece which was worked by human beings.
right. Well, you mentioned that people organize their trash like in a little like garbage dump. That's kind of comfy, no? That it makes me feel comfy that to know that people used to do that like hundreds of thousands of years ago already.
I mean, there are practical
Way to
reasons.
go.
Once you start settling or staying longer at the same place, even if you're a mobile hunter, you have these hunting camps. You do not want to have your the rotten bones of your last meal lying around and attract all kinds of nasty animals. So
Of
it
course.
makes sense to collect your trash. And below ground, it's pretty safe, so you won't attract any predators at night if you bury your trash just outside the tent settlement or wherever.
Hmm. Let's focus on the Big Papa,
Yeah.
Gobekli Tepe. First of all, if I understand it correctly, the excavations are still ongoing, right? But
Yes. Yeah.
can you describe what has been discovered so far?
Okay, I mean it's an ongoing project since 1995, so there's been a lot of excavation work. We were spending like 2 seasons each year in the field, which means 9 weeks each season. So a lot of excavation work has been done, and thus a lot of stuff has already been excavated. To characterize it in a very very short summary, there are monuments. As the important thing about Göbekli Tepe, or one of the important things, is the monumental architecture discovered, consisting of these T-shaped limestone pillars I already mentioned. You have to imagine these as monolithic, cut from one piece, large limestone pillars. About the largest one about 5.5 meters high, smaller ones about 4 meters high in these older buildings, and they're really looking like the capital letter T from the Latin alphabet. Of course, they
Yeah,
are
you
not meant.
mentioned before, I've seen the pictures, and while they are impressive in size, they really don't look like humans to me, to be honest. They're quite abstract.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. When I started excavating there in 2000, and I think I first joined in 2006 or seven, I knew of course the interpretation and everything. That these T-shaped pillars are meant to be anthropomorphic sculptures, but yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't see it in the beginning as well. But once we started excavating further, we uh, we uncovered that these at least the central pillars. I'm just saying something about the setup in a minute. Suddenly, we're showing carved reliefs of arms and hands brought together above the belly, and below them belts and loincloths of animal skin. So that really convinced me. Okay, these are really human-like, and that makes it so interesting because these 5.5 meters T pillars are indeed abstract sculptures. They are meant to depict anthropomorphic, human-like beings. I wouldn't go so far to call them deities or gods or something, because that would involve a whole concept we cannot just say now about their belief system. But they seem to be very important human beings, maybe ancestors or something. There must be a reason why they are so depicted in that size, and that's quite interesting. The abstract shape, to just come back to this, is, in my opinion, probably owed to the material, to the limestone, which naturally appears in the geology there in large limestone banks. So you really only, quotation marks only, have to break these banks out of the rock plateaus, and then cut this particular shape, which I think already gives the pattern of this rather flat kind of sculptures. But
Uh,
to come back to what
yes, please.
the
Yeah, what
architect
else is there besides the
exactly
T-shaped
the
structure
architecture itself.
sculpture?
So you've got already mentioned a central pair of two of these large T-shaped pillars standing on the rock plateau, and they are surrounded by more pillars of the same shape, which are a bit smaller, about 4 meters. And these pillars are connected by stone walls and stone benches, so that in the end, they build a circle of pillars gathering around these two pillars in the center. And with this gathering and the stone benches, they already seem to be reminiscent of some kind of a gathering, or they seem to be represent people meeting there. And this is quite interesting, because this is what was our first idea about how to interpret the function of these buildings, and that they might be places where people were gathering, meeting for certain occasions.
Circling back to the beginning,
Mhm.
to my opening, can we say with a degree of certainty that the complex at Gobekli Tepe was indeed built by hunter-gatherers? And if so, how is that possible since the structures are so massive and
Yeah.
presumably so heavy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we actually can say that they are constructed by Neolithic hunter-gatherers for a couple of reasons. First of all, I mentioned already the stone tools lying on the surface. Not only on the surface, but also all over the side, even in the filling of these enclosures, these buildings. And they are representing the typical stone tools we already knew before from the pre-pottery Neolithic. That is the culture in that part of the world, which forms the Neolithic. Pre-pottery just means before the invention or use of pottery. It's not that these people did not know how to make pottery; they didn't use it, they didn't need it. They had stone or leather or bark vessels to transport this stuff. So that is already a good indicator. The tools we found there are clearly what we knew from the Neolithic, the pre-pottery Neolithic, which is basically mobile hunter-gatherers. Then we found a lot of rubbish again, a lot of the remains of their food. We found a lot of bones of animals they apparently ate. And it turned out that all of these animals are strictly and exclusively wild species. There's no trace of domestication either of animals or plants. And finally, these pillars, I didn't mention it yet, are not only adorned with in some cases with arms, hands, and loincloths and belts, but much more often they are depicting animals. So there's a lot of animal stuff going on, and these animals are the typical, or representing to some part the typical hunted fauna of the time. So we have a lot of boar, aurochs, for example, the wild cattle, the wild predecessor of our modern cattle, foxes, lions, or leopards. So this really is representing a hunter's world. All this together is already a good indicator that there's a relation to these mobile hunter-gatherers of the pre-pottery Neolithic. But the final nail in this argument, so to say, is that we, of course, have not only these archaeological methods of dating, the comparison with known tools and so on, but, of course, we also can use scientific methods of dating. And the radiocarbon method, carbon dating of charcoal found in the plaster of some of the walls, so directly part of the architecture, and between the stones of these walls and the mortar of these walls. And the charcoal pieces in this plaster are dating to the mid-10th millennium BC as well, and which is the time of the pre-pottery Neolithic, of the mobile hunter-gatherers of the period and era.
I mean, but that's absolutely fascinating. But didn't hunter-gatherer hunter-gatherers live in like small communities? But for building something massive like this, you'd need a lot more people, no? You told me
Yeah,
one of these like T-shaped sculptures is 5 meters tall, and you don't just have these. You have a lot more stuff, like you said. So
yeah.
how's this possible?
I mean, technically, you wouldn't need that many people to build this stuff. But the more important point is that these people then could not go hunting, and they need to be fed somehow. So
Right.
that is an important point. I would like to stress that while Göbekli Tepe is among the oldest examples of this monumental kind of architecture, we know a lot of, in my opinion, similar monumental projects before. You mentioned the Paleolithic cave paintings, which in France and Spain are equally impressing, and in my opinion count as much as monuments as the architecture. We know villages built, or tent settlements built from mammoth bones, which are much older than Göbekli Tepe. So there already is some kind of history of impressing monumental tasks, but Göbekli Tepe counts as one of the earliest examples of this built stone architecture to this degree. And you're right, you would need a certain amount of people to create this. And in our interpretation, this is part of the whole site. This monumental aspect is part of this communal aspect is part of the monuments. So the idea is that mobile groups need to meet each other at certain occasions. So this is something we know from history, we know from ethnographic records as well. For exchanging of goods, information, marriage partners, you need these regular meetings of these smaller tribes, smaller groups. And often this is done at specific meeting and gathering places, which are reused over time. And sometimes they are marked with monuments to be recognizable or to be marked as these specific special places. And this is our idea or one of our ideas for Göbekli Tepe as well, that it served as one of these, we call them social hubs. So a site where people were meeting for certain occasions. And one thing to bring people together and to increase the cohesion within a group or between groups is to start communal projects. This is also something we know from history and from ethnographic sources. So the idea is that these people were meeting there for these communal building projects, and there's so much reparation going on. There's so much of rearrangement going on. A lot of these pillars are reused over and over and over, and these buildings are changed and rebuilt over time. So that building activity seems to be a central aspect of activity going on at the site. And this is our idea, that people were meeting there to build this stuff, to come together and create this stuff, maybe in the context of large feasts, because a lot of the amounts of bones we found there hint of the consumption of a lot of meat. So that would be also part of the argument, that you have a lot of people there which need to be fed, and the attraction to be there is this kind of feast. You throw a big party which attracts a lot of people, different groups from the region, and then they work together on this communal project. And this is also as much a project of social strengthening, social cohesion, and exchanging information, goods, and so on.
Oh, so like building for building's sake to hang out, basically, because that was my next question. Actually, what
one of the
right,
aspects.
right, yeah, I wanted to ask, what can we say about what this actually was? Was it a temple? Was it a dwelling? Or was it a big prehistoric Woodstock of sorts where people gathered basically to eat and then get trashed? And you said that's possible.
Yeah, I personally like the idea of just imagining that some kind of a prehistoric Burning Man or something, where people are coming together, having a great time, and doing these projects together. We have to say that our image of the site also, of course, changed over time. I mean, in the beginning, when excavation started and only these monuments were unearthed, it was quite remarkable that were or the other way around, we knew similar special purpose buildings, as we call them, so communal buildings, which are apparently not really used for domestic purposes, but more as gathering places, as with their paraphernalia, with sculptures and decoration. We knew these from other sites as well. Nevellichori, for example, I mentioned it. There, the T-pillars were part of a huge building, which was also probably a communal building. We know these buildings from other settlements, from other sites of the same period. And what was remarkable about Göbekli Tepe is that there were so many of these special purpose buildings. So while in other settlements there used to be one or two of these communal buildings, at Göbekli Tepe there were so many of them, and this led to the interpretation: okay, this is a strictly ritual site, or this is a site. I'm not a big fan of this this is the dichotomy, ritual and profane, or domestic and ritual, because I think when we're looking back that far back into the past, these things were much more seen together. So this is a very modern differentiation, that these things do not belong together. But anyway, at Göbekli Tepe, we first thought, okay, this is a strictly a site where we're strictly for these communal projects where people were meeting. But recent research by colleagues also has apparently unearthed a lot of more structures which are now interpreted as domestic structures. So people were apparently staying there for a longer time. when only these meetings, these occasional meetings. So it must have been a much bigger site where a lot more was going on actually.
Not to be harping on the hedonistic aspect too much,
Yeah,
but many episodes ago, I interviewed Edward Slingerland, the author of the very entertaining nonfiction book Drunk. I
yeah,
don't know if you had a chance to read it. And I remember him specifically mentioning that there is evidence of beer production at Gobekli Tepe.
yeah,
He then
yeah, yeah.
ties this fact to his theory that people actually began farming and settled down because they wanted an unlimited supply of booze. Any any truth to that pretty
Yeah,
wild theory?
it's a simple version. We put it a bit more scientific, but yeah, in general, that's a general idea. These feasts I mentioned, and the to attract the workforce necessary where to create the monuments. Apparently, these feasts may have also involved some alcoholic beverages, some very simple early form of beer, because we found a lot of stone vessels, of course, but not only these smaller, handy, transportable cups and pots, but really huge stone troughs, which are like bathtubs. I think 160 liters of volume. So really big vessels, and they were not movable. They were part of the architecture. And interestingly, in these vessels, we found um, some grayish stuff. We were, of course, interested in what it is, and had labs analyze it. And it turned out this was a kind of oxalate, which is also called beer stone, which still develops today in huge breweries. You have to clean the cauldrons every now and then because this beer stone is developing, which it's developing through the fermentation process of cereals. And this was a quite interesting idea, because we're now with Göbekli Tepe, we are right in the period where people are starting to experiment with the first cereals, with einkorn, for example, which is one of the founder crops, the Neolithic founder crops. And this, of course, piqued our interest, and we were thinking, okay, what were people doing here with cereals? And then apparently fermentation was involved, and of course beer was the next logical interpretation. Just for the record, this oxalate can also develop due to other plants. Spinach, for example, would be another option. But due to the period we're in with the experimentation of cereals, due to a lot of other tools which hint at processing of white grain, and the fact that one of the sites where where Neolithic domestication of einkorn was pinpointed to, in right about the same time, just lies about 60 to 80 kilometers away from Göbekli Tepe. I think it's we can be pretty sure to say that these people were already starting to experiment with cereals, and it makes sense if you've got so many different groups there and you have to feed them, because half of the people are doing this strange stonework and are not going with you on the hunt. You certainly create some kind of economic pressure just on to feed all the people there. So you need to start experimenting with other food resources. And if these wild cereals are just around the corner, of course it would make sense to collect them. And the idea is that in these stone troughs something happened that led to fermentation of these cereals. So maybe they were not really intending to create beer in the beginning, but some kind of gruel or kind of porridge or something like that. And standing too long in the sun, it's at one point turned bad. But there was some brave or pretty dumb guy among them who said, I taste it anyway. And he thought, oh, it's not that bad. So let's just try to do that again. So in the end, it is much easier to create some kind of beer than bread from cereals.
Yeah.
So
I remember that moment when I first tried beer myself. I
yeah,
also had the same reaction. It's not that bad. Let's try it again.
try it again. I mean, to create bread, you need to process the cereals, right? You need to clean the cereals. You need to produce flour. You need to produce dough. You need to bake it and everything. But beer can, as we see, develop quite accidentally if malted cereals are too with water too long in the sun. And we've got the what's the English term? Hefe. Wait a second.
Yeast.
Yeast, exactly. You get the yeast necessary to start fermentation already on your skin, so it can happen by accident. And so that's the general idea. But at some point, they just created beer, and which had a lot of advantages actually. There's no real water source on the site, so water needed to be collected. There are rainwater systems, for example, but beer is much more durable when collected rainwater for a longer time. It doesn't turn bad that quick as other stuff. And I know it's an ongoing discussion. Oh God! Now to explain this in English is really a challenge. What some people even today have trouble to digest cereal products.
Oh yeah, the celiac disease.
Celiac disease. And interestingly, the gluten, which is responsible for these celiac problems, is naturally, but the general idea, it's much more digestible.
I see. Yeah.
Than it's when it's went through this fermentation process, and all this together is, I think, a quite convincing argument about interpreting these oxalate stuff in the stone troughs as remnants of first beer. It's not a beer in our modern sense. It's a very light beer. We recreated it experimentally. It has not that much alcohol, but it's a good resource actually to provide some kind of drinking water.
Yeah, because you said there's evidence that people were staying there for a while, and since we're talking about hunter-gatherers still, they needed to hunt to survive, and they couldn't hunt to survive. So how are these people getting food, like beer and cereal experimentation aside, since there was no farming yet?
Not everybody was probably involved in building activity. So I think there were hunter groups which were just had the duty. Okay, you guys just go out and bring us some nice aurochs for the barbecue tonight, while the others are doing the stonework here.
So what do we know about the society, quote unquote, and the people who've built this? Do we know anything at all?
Yeah, that's in my opinion, even the more fascinating point about Göbekli Tepe than the monumental architecture, which is quite cool and visible. But just to think about it, you've got a lot of different people, different groups coming together at Göbekli Tepe, and they start to build these huge communal buildings. So some people need to go hunting to provide food for the evening. Some people need to cut the stones in the quarry. Others need to move it to the side. It needs to be erected, and then it has to be adorned with all these animal reliefs, which is a huge task of a lot of different people doing different things. So at some point, somebody had to coordinate this stuff. Somebody just had to say, okay, you do this, you do that. No, you don't do it like that way. We're going to move over there. So there had to be somebody in charge, at least in the planning process. And this already implies that there is some kind of social structure or social hierarchy going on, at least during the time of erecting these buildings, these pillars. And this is quite interesting. And this, to me, is the most fascinating point about the site, that these different groups were coordinated at this time. And it seems, it does not mean that we have a hierarchy all the time, that it is a strictly hierarchical society. We know this from other examples. From Native Americans, for example, they also, at the West Coast, there are examples, historic examples of these huge hunting camps which were created during summers. There are also a lot of different groups that are coming together, hunting together in huge communal hunts, and huge, large hunting camps were started to be built. And they were starting some kind of hierarchy within these hunting camps. So they had a police force, which could use force actually. And it could happen that one day you were the guy in charge to be putting force on another guy who did something wrong. But the next day when the hunt was over, you had to say nothing. So it was a temporary hierarchy. And this is something I could imagine for Göbekli Tepe as well. Some kind of a temporary hierarchy being built up during the time of construction of these meetings of these feet.
What about the culture? Can you surmise anything from all of these like sculptures? There's a lot of animals there carved into stone. Also sculptures of animals. There's T-shaped humans gathered in this supposed ceremony and stuff. So there's a lot of significance in all this. How to interpret it is probably a different question, but do you have any sort of theories or coherent narratives?
Some of the animals depicted, I mentioned that already, are what you would expect from a hunter-gatherer, or specifically a hunter group. So there's a lot of typical game depicted. We have gazelles, we have aurochs, very, very famously aurochs depicted. There are boars and so on.
Sorry, what's an auroch?
The aurochs is the predecessor of our modern cattle. It's the wild form of cattle. It's a huge animal, huge and heavy animal, and something you definitely do not want to oppose by yourself all alone. So you really need a hunter band to track it down. But then there are also other animals which do not really seem to be typical hunted game. So we have a lot of scorpions, we have snakes, many snakes, spiders even, which to us have this, they feel rather nasty and uncomfortable. I'm not saying that they had the same meaning for these people, but to us they seem threatening. And this is interesting because the threatening aspect is also repeated among the other animals. So the aurochs, for example, or in general, animals are always depicted as they have been encountered in nature. So the larger mammals are depicted in side view. Lions, foxes, you always see in side view. While insects, for example, or snakes are depicted from top down. So you see them just like you would encounter in nature. Interestingly, the aurochs, when depicted, is shown in side view, but his head is always depicted frontal. So you see the lowered head with the horns presented, just like an attacking, an aurochs running towards you. And this is also repeated in other animal depictions. So the lions or leopards are shown with snarling, with teeth visible. They are shown, they are leaping, they are jumping. The foxes are jumping as well. And this is interesting because this is typical hunting behavior. Jumping or leaping foxes are typical for hunting foxes. And all this together, to me, somehow suggests that there was a very strong emphasis on depicting hunting animals, not only hunted animals, but hunting animals. Sometimes you even see the prey depicted next to them. So it seems a bit like a self-reference. So the hunters are depicting animals as hunters. So maybe this has some kind of a meta meaning that there was a kind of an identification with these animals. So this, again, is the hunter complex. But on the other hand, and this is what I find so particularly interesting here in the Neolithic, the animal depictions are associated to these larger than life human sculptures. And this is a complete shift from what we see in the preceding periods. In the Paleolithic, I mentioned the cave paintings. You have a lot of animal depictions as well. Very, very clear, very naturalistic, detailed animal depictions. But rarely you see human beings depicted in these cave paintings. If so, they are rather symbolic or dead, or they are half animal, half human. But the majority is animals. And now we have these huge human depictions associated with animals. And I think this might suggest a shift in perception, a mind shift of perception of the own role of these hunters in nature. So in the Paleolithic, it was clear they were part of nature, where they were just participating in nature. And now in the Neolithic, they are starting to grow. They are bigger than nature. They are elevating beyond nature because they now realize, okay, they have an impact on nature. They can start selecting certain animals, certain plants, and so they are somehow not detached from nature, but they are elevating. They are on a different level now. They are influencing, impacting nature.
Wow, that's fascinating. I could listen to you talk about that
just
for
an
another
interpretation.
24 hours. Yeah. Very convincing one, though. Another interpretation that I heard you kind of lay out was that the enclosures you found at Gobekli Tepe were serving as some sort of an initiation ritual for young hunters. Could you break that
Yeah,
down for us a little bit?
that's also an idea we had, because we were struggling to how to explain these rather nasty animals and these flashing teeth and these snarling predators with snakes and scorpions and so on. And one idea, coming or being somehow influenced by building historic research as well, which was conducted on the site as well, was to have a look how these buildings were used actually. And one of these building C in particular, we could see that it was changed over time. It became smaller. Additional walls were built into it, and this was also the building where we could realize some kind of a pathway. We could see how it was accessed, and that's quite interesting because apparently there was some kind of a tunnel-like access, which led to the center of this building, the circular building with all these T-pillars and all the reliefs. And it started with some kind of staircase. You have to go down, and when you enter this tunnel-like thing, which was very, very narrow, you basically had to crouch through it. You had to crawl through it to enter it, and it was created in a way that it was not a straight tunnel. So when you entered it, you could not see what was awaiting you at the other end. So there were a lot of turns and twists going on. You had to make your way through it without knowing what was expecting you at the other end.
And they were deliberately made that way.
Yeah. It was a built way. It was a built with stones. It was a tunnel built with stones, and there were even some kind of portals you have to go through, which were adorned with snarling lions. So this was something. I mean, crouching through a dark tunnel without knowing where it ends already is some kind of a stressful situation, and that's how the idea with this possible initiation for young hunters came up. Because once you were in this tunnel and you finally entered the round building, the center of the building, you suddenly were surrounded by all these nasty animals. So in particular in this building with the tunnel, there was a 3D relief of a snarling predator. And it was right in a height that it was at eye level. So you enter the building, turn around, and then suddenly there was this animal jumping at you. And imagine all this in the flickering light of a torch, and maybe all the other hunters outside making strange noises. That would definitely be a very, very creepy experience, I'm pretty sure. And this is, and it makes sense in so far that it's not just a nice prank to somehow shock young hunters, but I said you are encountering these animals like an aurochs, which is a huge beast, which is a strong beast. And everybody in the hunting party has to be on point in such an attack. You need to rely on every single of your hunting mates. If there's only one who's just running chicken, it may be all over for the others. So this is a question of life and death. So it makes sense to somehow initiate hunters and select them in such a strange and spooky ritual, because this is when it's creating what in psychology is termed light bulb memories, flash bulb. So really it's memories which are sticking, and you are experiencing this with all these other hunters around there, with your group. So it puts you together, and this is somehow creating the group, is creating the cohesion in your group if you go through this experience. So this is the idea behind this. But again, all this is, again, only interpretation so far.
Klaus Schmidt, that you referenced already, the archaeologist who was leading excavations, was doing so for almost 20 years, I believe, from 96 to 2014.
Yeah.
Here we are in the year 2025, and the work is still very much ongoing. Yes. Excuse me, but why is it taking so long? The people demand answers.
Yeah. I mean, archaeology is a careful science, right? We could just rip all this from the ground and say, okay, now we have 200 more pillars, so we know where 200 pillars at Göbekli Tepe. But then the only information we would have is that there are 200 more pillars. The more interesting story these objects are telling us is not the object itself, but where find context. So where do we find these pillars? How is the soil around these pillars? Are there stones around the pillars somehow specifically put? Are there maybe depositions? We found the heads of stone sculptures deposited in the filling of some of these enclosures of these buildings. So all of this needs to be excavated, right? But in the moment when we are excavating these find contacts, it's gone. We're destroying it. So we need to carefully document all of this to get this information. And again, digging up an object just gives you the information there is an object. But digging up an object from an ash layer with a lot of charcoal next to it and maybe some other finds next to it tells you a whole different story. And you can date the charcoal. You can look where's the ashes from? What did they burn here? What other finds are here? So the whole story is not the object itself, but the find context. And we need to document this. And again, in archaeology, in modern archaeology, the aim is not to excavate everything as fast as possible, because it's destructive and it's gone when we excavate it. But the idea is to excavate just enough to answer specific questions you ideally come up with before you start excavating, and leave enough in the ground for further ongoing questions. Because one thing in archaeology is sure: for every question you can answer, 3 new are popping up, and you need more stuff to excavate it. And who knows what fancy analysis techniques and methods we have in 20 or 50 years, which will help us answer more questions than we can answer now. I sometimes wish Schliemann would have left us a bit more of the core of Troy to use some radiocarbon dating, for example, or some phosphate analysis to get more information. We are now at a point where we can extract DNA from sediment. And this was not possible 10 years or 20 years ago. So there is a good reason to leave some stuff to apply these cool new technologies once they're available. So that's why it takes so long. And technically, at Göbekli Tepe, it didn't took that long. I mean, Schliemann started excavations in Troy at 1871 or 76. It's still ongoing. Pompeii excavation started in the 18th century already. So I think we're pretty good right now with some 40 years.
Sorry, but all of my knowledge of archaeology comes from the Indiana Jones trilogy, hence the ludicrous questions.
No, it's fair enough.
But speaking of people demanding answers, when we don't get them, we start to invent a bunch of crazy shit. So there's been a real surge of this stuff. Folks like Graham Hancock have gone mainstream with their horrible little Netflix shows masquerading as real archaeology. And Gobekli Tepe usually features quite prominently in all that.
It does.
What's your take on this surge of pseudo-history content and Gobekli Tepe place at the center of it?
I mean, on the one hand, I can totally understand this fascination because this is what brought me into the field in the beginning as well, right? Finding answers. So what were these people? Where is this stuff coming from? Where are we coming from? So I totally understand the interest, but I find it a bit sad that we, as archaeology, we have to compete with these rather easy and simple answers, which are so much more sexy than the complex stuff. We
aliens,
for example. Aliens is a totally different topic because this is really robbing these past people of their cultural achievements. And this is really, I think, really sad and really bad, because it also says something about us today. So not believing that our ancestors were able to do this is somehow also diminishing us today as humans and as society. So I understand where it's coming from, but I would even understand if people say, yeah, we don't really understand what you're doing, or we don't agree what you're saying there. But it's this apodictic and this angry approach, which apparently is this pseudo-archeology is going. But there must be a huge archaeological conspiracy hiding stuff instead of publishing this stuff, which would make much more sense actually. And yeah. If you ever visit an excavation, you know it would be impossible to convince all archaeologists to hide stuff.
Jens, what are you hiding? Please tell us. You're part of the conspiracy. You must have something.
If I had proof for some ancient super society, I would definitely have my own Netflix show right now and a book deal. So I don't see a reason to hide this, to be honest, because I think this Netflix show would pay off much, much more when average archaeologist salary.
Were there any human remains found at Göbekli Tepe?
Yes, there were. Not during the time I was actively excavating there. Well, not real burials. We found fragments, skull fragments in particular, and some other things like a kneecap or so, but no real burials. Which is also quite interesting, because one idea of our first ideas was that this might have been a place related to burial ritual. We know from other sites, like Chayunu, I mentioned it, that the dead are often buried within the walls of buildings or underneath the floors of buildings. And sometimes bones show marks that they have been reworked. So there are bones which show some painting on it. There are skulls which show a plastered face, and which of course implies that at some point these bones had to be retrieved from the graves, or they were defleshed already. And this led to the idea that they maybe needed specific places where this defleshment was taking place, excavation places. And again, historic records show us from Asia in particular, that the so-called sky burials are an option to deflesh, to excavate a human body. Simply put, it means that you put the deceased in a faraway place, remote place where not many settlement activity is taking place, and that animals are doing the defleshing part. Mostly vultures, for example, are used for this. So they are picking the flesh, leaving the bare bones. You collect the bones, and then you shred the bones, either paint them or bury them. This is interesting because among the iconography, not only of Göbekli Tepe, but the PPN, the Pre-Pottery Neolithic in general, vultures are playing a very important role, it seems. And we have a lot of depictions of vultures together with separated human heads or headless human bodies. At Göbekli Tepe, we have sculptures of birds, maybe vultures, sitting on human heads. And this is interesting. So you have vultures and apparently dead people. Somebody without a head is hardly living anymore. And this led to this interpretation that maybe this is a hint already of this specific burial ritual, a similar burial ritual where people are excarnated, which would make sense looking at the modeled faces and the painted bones, which had to be defleshed at some point. And the idea was that maybe Göbekli Tepe was one of the places where this practice was happening. That would explain why we did not find the burials, because they were buried elsewhere. But yeah, it's just an interpretation which lacks evidence as of yet, despite the iconography. And as far as I know, recently in recent excavations, more human remains were uncovered as well. But I'm not in the picture how detailed they relate to the rest of the site.
Last question. When all is said and done, when the excavations are over, do you think we're going to get a clear or a clearer picture of what the site actually was, so we can finally discard the theory that it was a little green man that came from space and
I mean, I think that one we can already discard, because we luckily they were so kind.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I mean, we know where they were doing this stuff, right? They left us in the quarries, which are right next to the site. They left the tools. They left unfinished pillars. So we pretty much know how they do it. So that's answered. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm convinced we get a much clearer picture rather sooner than later, because what's now happening is that it's not only Göbekli Tepe. I mean, I know that Göbekli Tepe used to be this lighthouse up on the mountain, which was a specific and extraordinary site, which sometimes it still is painted in some of the reporting, but it's not the only site. Already 10 years ago, we knew like 10 or 12 more sites like this in the surroundings of Göbekli Tepe, where already on the surface, similar pillars, similar tools, similar sculptures were visible. And luckily, Turkish colleagues have created a huge research project, the Taş Tepeler project, where now many of these sites are excavated and researched. And there are already exciting results showing us that this is not a a singular phenomenon, but it's a culture. It's a real culture we deal here with in this area in this period. And with the help of these new research excavations, we already have a different picture than 15 years ago, and I'm pretty sure in the next couple of years our picture would be much more detailed still.
Jens, what an absolutely thrilling conversation. I have to get you back in a couple of years when that happens. Until then, how can people find you? I think you have a website as well as Twitter or X.
Yeah. I'm on the typical social media under my name, but maybe even more important, if you would be interested in learning more about ongoing research at Göbekli Tepe. I know that the current the project director, the coordinator of the excavations at Göbekli Tepe, Lee Clare, has a very active Twitter account. He's sharing insights into ongoing work. And the other Taş Tepeler projects, Karahan Tepe prominently, Cyberge, are also very prominently reported in social media, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky. So if you're interested in following real life progress, definitely look these colleagues up and follow them. Yeah,
will do. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Hey peeps, thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow and rate on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Otherwise, I will just fade into obscurity forever. Also, feel free to support me on Patreon. This is a one-person podcast. I do everything by my little old self. You'd be surprised at how much work gets poured into this, especially with no team, and coupled with my stubbornness when it comes to reading stupid ads, which I refuse to do. But you can help by hopping on Patreon and finding the Smart Cookies podcast on there and giving me your money, of course. And then last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons, Tovarish and Tovarishice. Like always, without you, there is no Smart Cookies podcast, which makes you not just absolute legends, but also producers of this show. So eternal thanks goes to Bash Machkin, Simon Vidmar, Luke Johnson, Jim Bird, Bewildered Beauty, Davorin Paulica, Dale Mia, Chert Gosar, Sasha Sodia, Amy Ons, Mattia Renchel, Florian Hawa, Peter Karba, Matija Zupančić, Dejan Žolir, Darej, Rok Tržan, Saša Vipotnik, Neven Cvijanović, Juš Premrov, Sirkezi, Goran Ivašić, Anže Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaš Mahar, Štrole, Ajda Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Gordon Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen Veronica, and Taichi. The list is getting longer, which makes me super grateful. Thanks again, everybody. Means a lot.